Good. So, as an introduction, my name is Louie McCurley, and I'm CEO of Pigeon Mountain Industries. PMI is a manufacturer of life safety rope and equipment in the United States. We also distribute some equipment from other brands as well. But part of our mission at PMI is to encourage the free flow of information to help people who are in the rope business or who would like to be. And so recently we joined up with Brandon Beavers to kick off this rope-based business collective, the stated purpose of which is to provide an open forum where we can all learn from each other, share knowledge, and collaborate together with the rope access community to help build knowledge and skills for your life on rope. So we appreciate those of you who have joined us today, and I'm sure that you're probably familiar with Zoom type meeting software by now, but I will remind you of a couple of things. First, please keep your mic on mute unless you're speaking to the group. That makes it easier for everybody to hear. And you can find controls, like the engagement controls, are at the bottom of your screen. So whether you're joining us by computer or by phone, it should be on the bottom either way. If you don't see them, just tap on your name or your image on the screen, or scroll down with your mouse to the bottom of your screen, and those controls should pop up. If you have any questions at any time, you can either type it into the chat box, you can click the little button that says raise your hand, and then when we have a break in the discussion, we can call on you and you can unmute and ask your question. So either way is fine. So this all came about largely because of Brandon Beavers. Brandon posted some time ago that he really was looking for dialogue and people to discuss with, and he specifically called me out and said, "Hey, Louie, you know, I'm looking for people to help mentor me in the rope access business." And I responded and said, "Well, you know, I'm looking for the same kind of people, so maybe we should look together." And so we've pulled together this little effort to try to just make that happen. So Brandon, I'll turn this over to you to share a little about yourself and your motivations, and to introduce Brandon Powers.
Thank you for the kind words. So motivations with this is just to collaborate and gain some knowledge and see what we can learn from everyone. Everyone has different experiences, different things that they've gone through, and it's just going to be invaluable information. And then we record them, and we can go back and look and learn on this for a long time to come. But Brandon Powers, I met him back in 2007. Well, I met him a little bit before that. I worked with him back in 2017. Started working for a company here in Chattanooga doing building maintenance, window washing, cleaning, stuff like that. And Brandon and Alicia were the first two people to teach me. So they were both on the job with me. And it was really, really nice. Like, watching me go over for the first time with an ID, and Alicia's just hovering like the mother, like, you got it. But they were very instrumental in the beginning of my rope access. There's some people that get washed out in their first job and they hate it and they never want to go back. And they made sure that I knew what was safe, what was acceptable, and put me out on a good path before I got going somewhere else. But I'm going to let Brandon Powers introduce himself, tell some of his background and history, and then we'll get rolling into this thing. Go for it.
Awesome. Thank you, Brandon. So my name is Brandon Powers. I transitioned into rope access through the emergency services. I was a firefighter, advanced EMT for about 15 years, career paid. I rode a heavy rescue for the city of Murfreesboro for the majority of that time. So I was tasked to do specialized rescues and things with them. Transitioning out of that into rope access came toward the end of that career. Also, currently, I still do the emergency services. I still keep my certifications current as an acting lieutenant with the Chattanooga Hamilton County Cape Cliff Technical Unit. So I'm still involved in emergency services and with a really good team, but I do that as a volunteer now. So primarily my my source of income is strictly rope access. I think it was a good transition for me. The reasons for moving from rope access, or moving from the fire service into rope access, predominantly came from the the one thing that I enjoy doing the most, and that is rope work. I found a lot of that in the fire service, but I found that particular interest to be limiting, or at least I had personally hit a ceiling in that. So I started to look at other opportunities and saw that you can do rope work for a living, and so that interested me, and it seemed like sort of the next step in my progression of becoming a rope practitioner. So that's what I enjoy doing the most. So out of that, the fire service background though really helped a tremendous amount in how expeditiously the rope access career took off. I do give a lot of credit to that background and how I've applied the skills and the knowledge that I learned in the fire service into the rope access world. It certainly has been a benefit. Even before that, before the fire service, one of my first hobbies was caving, doing rope work in caves, and that came long before the fire service did. And so even when I got into the fire service, naturally, I kind of gravitated towards the rope work that was available in the fire service: rope rescue, confined space, even some structural collapse applications, things like that. So I naturally gravitated towards that. It was nice fighting fire, but I was more interested in the ropes. So the caving career, I think, is probably what kicked off the interest in rope-based activities. Later, as I've come to find, it's really interesting to have a background in caving, the fire service, and bringing all of that to industrial rope access. I think that I've been blessed to have some of those backgrounds to be able to bring into the industrial rope access arena. Certainly all that we do in rope access, we can sort of circle back to the beginnings coming from one of those two fields in some of this. So it's all connected. Having done that, once I got out of the fire service into industrial rope access, prior to leaving the fire service, I had joined the Cave Cliff technical team here in Chattanooga, and found a lot of joy in being able to do cave rescue, surface-based rescues with them. So that's something that I think will always be a part of me, is the rescue mentality and having some type of connection to that. So running into the industrial rope access, that's kind of where we're at. I'm a senior level 3 consultant, rope access training coordinator for Applied Technical Services out of Marietta, Georgia. So that's my current title. That's what I do professionally now.
What was your first rope access job?
Interestingly enough, my very first rope access job, I took a pretty big bite, and I took on a job. And at the time, I didn't know the whole scope of what I was actually getting into. But I took on a job where I was asked to join a team of folks that were going to pressure wash, tuck point and mortar, and seal the entire campus of a local hospital. Little did I know at that time what kind of endeavor I was actually taking on, what kind of task that was going to be. But before I get into all of that, I think there's some more that we could talk about. It was a really good start. It wasn't the most proper start. But at the time, I didn't know exactly what I was getting into, and I didn't know exactly how to go about it. The one thing that I did have were really good resources. I had some really good people in my corner that I could call and ask questions, that I consider mentors, still to this day, consider them mentors to me. And they guided me in sort of the right paths. And they just guided me to the information. And then it was up to me to make the decision on how I wanted to proceed with that. For myself at that time, I chose to take the big bite and go for it. And you know, in the beginning, it was a little difficult, but I think it's turned out well. And I certainly learned a lot from that very beginning, that first experience.
So I would like to invite anybody who has questions to, at any time you wish, if you'd like to type them into the question, the chat box, or if you'd like to raise your hand. Otherwise, Brandon Beavers and I are just going to kind of keep throwing questions at Brandon. Brandon, do you have something you'd like to ask?
So my first question would be, what is the expectations of a level 3 when you get hired on at a job? What are your things that you should just know that you're doing? What are some of the things that maybe aren't implied, but good things to keep in the back of your mind, just to help keep yourself professional and prepared?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So kind of going back to that very first job, that's where I found myself, was asking those questions. At that time, I was a fresh level 1. And if we're following SPRAT safe practices, then we know that a level 1 does not need to be a site supervisor, especially for a very large project, and it being the very first project. So there's a bit of that self-inventory that I needed to do to decide, am I getting in over my head? Is this something where I'm going to lose control and hurt someone or hurt myself? And those were certainly questions that came to my mind. Those are still the questions that come to my mind on job sites that I do now. Is this within my wheelhouse to do? Am I able to do what I'm being asked to go do? Can I keep people safe? Can I keep myself safe? And those are still the same questions. I've come to find there's so many more too, though, and some of them seem like silly questions that you wouldn't think. But when I'm preparing for a job site, a lot of times now, and there's a couple of perspectives we can look at this. One is as a freelance level 3, coming into it being hired out by a company, but not really knowing the inner workings of that company. You're being subbed to them, and that's kind of where you enter the conversation. The other point of view is that you've established a rapport with a company, so you know their policies and procedures, and you kind of know how that information flow happens prior to the job. So there's two different perspectives there, and there is a little bit of a difference in how that information arrives to you as a level 3. Sometimes I've found that you don't really have much information until you show up day 1. And in some of that, you can feel pressure to, be on the move and skip steps, or, maybe put yourself in harm's way without realizing it, because you feel that pressure to provide for that client. And I've found myself in that position, and I've also had to once again keep the integrity and say, hold up, we need to stop. There needs to be an information vacuum here. I need some information to go on before we can proceed. I'm doing all of this for the sake of those first 2 questions. Am I going to keep everybody safe? Am I going to keep myself safe? And that's it. That's kind of how I start that. So for the company I work for, I have a program administrator. That rope access program administrator is the one who acquires the jobs, and from there he will put together the team that he sees fit to go do this task. And so in that, a lot of times I'll get a phone call, and it'll say, hey, I've got this job coming up. It's going to require the management of 3 technicians. Here's a brief synopsis of the scope of it. Are you interested in taking that job? I'll say yes to that, and then from there he will just put me in touch with the client. So then, go ahead.
I was just going to ask, so you're talking about managing multiple technicians. Can you give me just a brief overview of what your what the difference between your level 1, 2, and 3 will be? What their
Yeah,
functional differences are?
Yeah. So a lot of times the level ones, they may have another skill set that accompanies their SPRAT Level 1 certification. Majority of what I do is inspection work or things of that nature. So a lot of times I'm facilitating access for engineers to go do their job. So as a level 1, what I'm looking for as far as the level 1 competency, at least for coming onto the job site, is are they able to navigate the rope system safely? And you know, if I've never worked with that technician before, usually a brief phone call before the job starts to kind of see where we're at. How comfortable do you feel? You know, that will allow me to better come up with a rigging plan. I'm certainly not going to come up with a rigging plan that requires, you know, lots of re-anchors or really complicated type rigging when that level 1 technician just doesn't feel comfortable getting into those positions. I wouldn't want to send a technician into that knowing that the only way we're going to be able to recuperate from that position if something were to happen is that I might physically have to go get them. So there may be a different rigging plan that could be implemented that certainly makes it easier for not only them, but for myself as a level 3, thinking about that, you know, that proactive rescue plan. And so that's kind of what I'm expecting out of a level 1 is, do they feel comfortable on rope? And do they, you know, do they still obtain that same level 1 skill set? Are they able to navigate the basic rope maneuvers? As a level 2, I would like to see that same thing, but also a little bit more interest in the rigging portion of it. As a level 2, sometimes as a level 3, you're tasked with all the rigging, and you know, if you can divide and conquer, that can also be, you know, helpful not only to the level 3, the team, but also the client too, for efficiency and what they've asked us to do. So now as a level 2, I'm kind of looking for some just basic rigging skills. If we're speaking the same speak and I ask to have, you know, a multi-point, multi-function anchor established, then, you know, they can go do that without my direct supervision. Now we'll come back to once it's completed, because I can delegate that work, but I cannot delegate that responsibility. So I need to go back and verify that the systems are good to go. And we have that that team mentality where, you know, and I would have that technician come and check my rigging as well. So not only are we facilitating that experience of learning, and hopefully the level 2 is being tasked to go do a job that eventually, when he transitions into a level 3, he feels comfortable doing, but that we're still maintaining that team integrity as well. As a level 3, I know that you know, it's recently changed in SPRAT safe practices as far as how they defined a job site supervisor. They need to at least be a level 3 or the equivalent of, and a level 2 can also do that job with certain restrictions. But if you find yourself on the job site with a bunch of level 3s, this is where sometimes it can get interesting. You know, we all bring a lot to the table. All of us as technicians do. And sometimes level 3s, we all have our way that we would rig it, the way that we would run it, the way that we would do it. I think in the get-go, it's good to start to build that team foundation to where there is one person in charge, but that's only because there needs to be. In the flow of work, the order that it needs to go, somebody has to have the big picture, sort of the telescope view, if you will. And then I would like to task the level 3s that may be working under me with more of the microscope view, where I do give them a role as a level 3, but maybe it's to go manage this portion of the job site as they see fit. I'm not going to micromanage them. They should know what they're doing. They do. And so to me, that's kind of the 3 levels and the expectations of that.
Thank you.
I have one thing to add. Could you break it down a little further for someone who has no idea what SPRAT is? What is SPRAT? What do they stand for? What does SPRAT stand for? And what's the requirements to move from levels 1, 2, and 3 and to obtain a level 1 in the first place?
Yeah. And these were all the questions I asked myself too in the beginning. Coming from the fire service, and sometimes it's easy to do this, even as you build your rope-based knowledge. You can look at a class and you think level 1, Schmidt, I know all that stuff. Put me to level 3. That's where I feel like I'm at. Well, what I came to find with SPRAT, and SPRAT stands for the Society of Professional Rope Access Technicians. They are a member-driven organization, and that's a really key point to bring up there is member-driven, and we may come back to that point. But ultimately, they are a third party, a third party entity that certifies technicians based on a set of criteria that they put out. They also have created a document called the Safe Practices document, which is basically a collection of information that if you follow this information, then you're less likely to have a gravity-induced death. It's a really great foundation of how to approach an industrial work site utilizing ropes. They have free documents online that you can go check out at sprat.org under their resources tabs. It's all on there for you to view free. So if you ever wanted to go check that out, it's there and available. It's a really good collection of information. As far as once you start this process as a SPRAT level 1, to get in, all you need to do is find a certification course. And there's plenty of certification courses all around the U.S. And any of those, I would say, are pretty reputable places to go receive this training. So I would start there. You just need to be 18 years of age, physically fit to some degree, and willing to learn and to give it a good opportunity or a good shot. What I found is that even in the SPRAT level 1, coming from a background of having a lot of technical rescue under my belt and that sort of thing, I quickly realized that this sandbox, and I called it a sandbox, this collection of information, this specific type of training was very different than anything else I had ever experienced or ever learned about. In the rescue world, we still use 2-rope systems. In industrial rope access, we use 2-rope systems, but we do tend to use them differently. And not to mention differently, but there is so much more detail involved in how we go about using them. The equipment, I think as a SPRAT level 1, I came out on the other side of that 1-week class, probably knowing more about my equipment, had more wherewithal about the use of rope and how to apply it than I had in basically any of my previous rescue technician classes of any sort. It was quite mind-blowing. What I also realized was what I didn't know. And it's easy to come from a place of well, I know quite a bit about it, probably pretty good about it, but I think at that point was when I realized the more I start to learn about these things and roping in general, the more I start to realize what I don't know about it and how it's continually changing and growing. It almost seems like here lately, daily, it's rapidly moving, and if you're not really reading up on it and studying it quite often, you could fall behind pretty quick in it. That excited me. For one, it humbled me in that I knew, wow, there's more that I don't know, and I saw that I was excited to get more classes, to learn more things, But then also I was excited to know that there may be no ceiling on this, that I can continue this for a really long time, hopefully for as long as I'm able to stand up straight. That excites me because that means that I can continue on with my passion and doing ropes, and it doesn't feel like I'm going to hit a dead end. So that's what excited me about the end of my first week at the end of my certification in SPRAT Level 1. Now, once
Brandon,
you obtain your SPRAT Level, yeah.
I was just going to ask you, I think Alicia has a question.
Okay.
I do. And it kind of goes with what you were just kind of talking about and flowing through about learning more stuff and constantly being up on what's going on in this industry. So my question kind of is, to me, I found a lot of networking is really, really important. But I'm looking for tips. Like, one, as your organization and you're looking for level 1s, level 2s and stuff like that, besides word of mouth and knowing who's who in the industry, how does a new rope tech navigate this and make those connections and get that additional information? Is there resources out there for us? And is a CV ever good for us? Like, I'm looking at applying for a job. Is it just who I know? Or is there a CV, a resume type thing I could, or have you seen those around? Am I kind of asking just kind of how do you navigate and get into and meet the people to get the jobs you need to get?
Yeah, I love it. And that is an excellent question, and one that I do get often. I will say that from my point of view, like what I've seen, and my experience may be a little skewed as opposed to some other folks, but a lot of it does have to do with word of mouth. Some of it does have to do with that. There is a strong bit of that involved. Having said that, I think there are a few resources out there that could try to place you in particular jobs. One of those might be taking a certification course with a company that is looking for technicians. That might be one way of sort of getting your foot in the door at the same time. And on the same token, going to classes, I have found that connection to people, that word of mouth, so to speak, I've seen that be so beneficial in classes where I've chosen to go take a class, and at the end of that class, maybe the content in the class wasn't what I really walked away with, that I felt that I paid, that my money bought the most, and it may have been those relationships that I created. The content was probably good and I did learn something, but at the same time, I also walked away with that connection to someone. And, not only in rope access, but in everything we do in life, you never know who you're going to meet, and you never know who that next person is that could potentially change your life too. And maybe in that's reciprocated, maybe you change theirs as well. So as far as online resources and places to go, to my knowledge, and someone else may be able to speak to this, but to my knowledge, there is not like a database, a place where you can go and type in your name and search for a rope access job specifically that I'm aware of. I have heard of a few like websites maybe you can go to do that, but none that I have heard of that have been successful. Something to keep in mind is that in rope access, what I think is the reason why word of mouth is one of the more important ways to get your name out there and stuff is it has a lot to do with trust. You're working in a team, but you're also going to do a job that it's inherently dangerous. And some of this, some of it needs to be unspoken, that I would trust my life in your hands. And maybe it's not so literal, but at the same time, it kind of is. So I think that's the reason why that mode of connection or being able to find a job is usually the one that works out best for most folks. Ways to do that are take classes, get in front of people, reach out to people who are in the industry, and ask questions. If there are people that you probably want to be around, they'll take the time to help you out. They'll answer your questions. They'll they'll encourage you. They'll find ways to get you the resources you're looking for. That's my experience with it. Anyone else have anything on that?
Yeah, I've got something. So I agree. Talk to everyone you can. And I take and I save their number. And then the comments section, I'll say where I met them, what the relationship was, and then who they work for, or just put a little something in there. And then if I'm ever looking for a job, I can just, and I'll put it in there as like rope and then their name. So I don't have to try and find everything. It'll pull up everyone I've ever talked to rope related and go through and just sift through what might be helpful. I have gotten one job off of Indeed for a rope access job. And then there are also lots of listings for wind turbine technicians on Indeed, including the company that I currently work for, which is Rope Partner. So wind technicians with green energy just becoming bigger and bigger, and turbines failing and failing, they need people to repair them. So there is that. But my biggest, besides networking and just asking, hey, is there any jobs going on with your company, is social media. I've gotten on social media and gotten most of my gigs. And I'll just say, hey, does anybody got any rope gigs going on? And I almost always have somebody say, hey, yeah, we got something going on. But that has been my experience with trying to find jobs. Keep a good logbook or record of who you meet and what is talked about, and maybe like even a note about something in their personal life. That's what my company does. Every time I talk to them again, they talk about something that was going on in my life the last time I talked to them, and it builds a good rapport. But yeah, social media, you can get lucky on Indeed or job sites occasionally, and then just networking really well. But I believe we should probably get to another question or two. So I'm going to let you have it, Lou, unless you have something you need to add, Brandon.
No, all that I'll say is, Alicia, there may be a niche right there to create some type of networking site that would accommodate us rope access technicians to be able to communicate like that. I don't know. Could be an opportunity. I don't know.
And this is how it starts.
Your sound is cut.
Sorry about that. Is that better?
Yep. Yes.
Your world is very different as a level 3 and as in a supervisory position. But looking back to when you didn't necessarily have the stature in your company that you have today, have you had to work with somebody in the field that whose rigging principles you just didn't agree with, or maybe who just plain scared you, and how do you deal with that? And how do you deal with that as a level 1 as compared to a level 3?
Yeah, yes. The short answer is yes, absolutely. I have certainly worked on job sites where I've stopped work. Like, I'm not doing this. This is not happening. And you know, somewhere in there, that's an awkward conversation to have. But once again, if I'm asking myself and I'm being true to the people around me and myself, and am I going home today? And I think that's what we have to ask ourselves. And I look at this rigging, and you know, now as a level 3, I sort of pick my battles to a certain extent. You know, I ask myself, is it safe? Is it going to work? Yes. Okay. Well, maybe it's not the most efficient, but it's certainly going to do what it's going to do, and that's fine. And maybe we can have a discussion about it later, but maybe right in the middle of the work day, while we're all geared to go to work, that may not be the time to create that disruption. Now, that's for something, like I said, that's safe and will work. But if you, as a level 1, 2 or 3, it doesn't matter. If you see something unsafe, you absolutely should stop work and ask at the very least. As a level 1, you should always ask. I, as a level 3 or site supervisor, encourage and empower the people that are working underneath me to ask those questions, to make sure they feel safe in the rope set that they're getting on, or any of that stuff. I also empower them to make decisions on whether they see something that is safe or not. The thing is as a level 3, you can try as hard as you wish to have all of your bases covered. I've seen all the potential hazards. I've come up with all the ways to mitigate it, all these things, but there can always be something that you just didn't see. And if a level 1 technician is sort of afraid to speak out about something that they may see, or they don't feel empowered to do that, then maybe it goes missed, and then maybe that becomes an accident. And it wasn't necessarily my fault or their fault, but it happened. But if I can get that technician to feel like it's okay, that we are a team, and that their decisions also hold weight in the operation, then that's certainly something that I welcome and encourage.
One of our hopes is that as level 3s, by the time people get to level 3, we hope that they have the capability to make that differentiation that you're talking about. Not the way that I would do it, but safe. In practice, I find that that's not always the case. You can't just assume that because somebody has achieved that level 3 that they have that capability. As a trainer and as somebody who's driving that side of your business, how do you try to instill that in those people who are supposed to have that depth of knowledge?
Yeah, that can be tough. You know, you've heard the old saying, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink, and that sort of thing. But somewhere in there, I think you just have to be a good example of what that is. And I try to be that. Now, you know, I'm human. I fall short too, but I try to exemplify that. An example is I was on a job site and I was managing 2 other level 3s, 2 level 2s, and a bunch of level 1s. It was a pretty large job site. And because I had the 2 level 3s, like I said, I wanted to divide to conquer, and I empowered those level 3s to take a portion of the team and go to one side of the job site to work, and then the other to go to the other side, and we would collaborate that way. I was explicit to say that we would be using remote rescue techniques. We will be rigging to lower everything. And that's the technique that we should apply. And it was simple structural rigging, which means that we were just basically putting a sling around a very large I-beam, rigging rope straight to it. There was no complicated rigging involved. But the one request is that we wanted to be able to lower these technicians to the ground if anything were to happen. We had a free fall to do that. It was the perfect scenario to rig it that way. And so I tasked them to do it. Off they go. And once again, before work starts, I want to just put my eyes on it to make sure. And so I asked them to radio over when they had it rigged. I'd come over, check it out, give the good thumbs up. We'd all go to work. Well, I get over there, and this level 3 is hard tied in. And all of his extra resource, is at the bottom of the drop in a big pile. And I'm thinking, man, first off, honestly, my first thought was, is this guy doing this on purpose? Like, is he trying to see what I'm made of here? Because, it caught me off guard a little bit, honestly. And so I asked him, I said, man, what's your plan? I was going to give him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he's got a plan. And I was like, what's your plan for your remote rescue? And he goes, well, I'm going to go down to a pickoff. And I was like, okay, but what if we were just to rig this to lower? So we pull that resource up, we put maybe a device, or even we use a Muntner hitch or whatever the case may be, and we rig it to lower, and we do that. And he's like, well, that just seems like a big waste of time. I said, well, we've already wasted a lot of time having this discussion, but here's what I want. I want you to put it in a rig to lower scenario, please. So do that. I'll be back. I left, and I come back. He has that rope set done, but all the rest are still hard tied in. So and you can see where this is going. It's sort of frustrating. What I did come to find out later is that he didn't know what I was talking about. He's a 10-year level 3. And, I guess there's part of me that should have I should have asked maybe to the side if he was clear on exactly, and maybe I should have asked what technique he had in mind he was going to go use before he went. Maybe I could have handled that a little differently up front at some point, but at the same time, here we are having this conversation. But the thing was, is he got a little bit snappy with me, and at the end of the job, we were having our debriefing, as I do on all jobs. What went well? What went wrong? How can I improve as a site supervisor? How, you know, those types of things. And he asked me, he goes, man, he goes, I got a question for you. He goes, why are you so insistent on rigging everything to lower? And I was like, well, I was kind of quiet for a second because I was collecting my thoughts. And he quickly spoke up. He goes, do you not know how to do a pickoff? And I was like, man, I'll tell you what, I practiced pickoffs before I came out here on this job just to make sure that I could, and I was in practice. When was the last time you practiced your pickoffs? You know, so then we get into this little bit of thing, but rather than going down that, I simply asked the group at that point. I thought, well, I'll just ask everyone. And I did. I said, if any of you found yourselves in trouble on rope, how quickly would you like to be rescued? And, you know, and of course the technicians are all like, man, just as fast as you could, right? I'm like, exactly. I think remote rescue systems, rigging to lower, is going to provide the fastest and most prompt way to rescue anyone, especially in that particular scenario. If you haven't practiced your pickoffs in a month, I'm gonna pull your pickoff card. I'm not sure that in the heat of the battle, in an emergency situation, I have less confidence that someone can go down, immediately effect a perfect pickoff rescue and get them to the ground faster than I could simply walk over, untie a backup knot, and lower you to the ground. So I say that big long story to say that that's how I handled that. I'm not saying it was right or wrong, but somewhere in there, he understood it, and we had a conversation after it. Two parts. One, I shouldn't have assumed he knew what I was talking about, even as a 10-year level 3. The second part of that is, I think he understood now what I more meant by remote rescue systems and why that's important, especially after everyone voiced their opinion about wanting to be rescued as quickly as possible. So,
and if you can, it's always best not to put another person in harm's way, because you don't know what it was. I mean, if you could do a remote rescue, there was a guy that got struck by some ash on a tower cleaning a couple of years ago, and he died. If it's rigged to lower, because someone did have to go pick him off, they could lower him down without putting another person at risk for another falling object. And then you only have one person that's in the hazard, and then one person's just operating it from the top. Gets them down faster, and it only keeps one person at risk.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm a firm believer in that. And to that extent, I have been able to rig some very complicated scenarios, all the while making every bit of it rigged in such a way that I could still rescue you remotely. And I'm talking about through re-anchors, rope to ropes, all those things. And so if you take the time it takes to figure that out and sort of do your due diligence in pre-planning it, I'm convinced that most every scenario can be rigged to lower.
You said something that's near and dear to my heart, and that is, if you haven't practiced your pickoffs in the last month, I'm going to pull your pickoff card. Earlier in the conversation, you also said something about how rope access and fire service skills or methods and techniques are beginning to overlap. I'm going somewhere with this, I promise. As I see rope access evolving into the fire service and more rope-based techniques kind of taking hold, one of my concerns is that as firefighters have a lot of jobs to do, and they don't all have anything to do with rope. And as we put more and more firefighters on rope to do rope-based methods for rescue, it concerns me that the skill sets may not be able to be maintained as readily as perhaps ground-based techniques that we currently use are. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I certainly see that. Um, yeah, coming from the fire service background, and I know Jason could certainly speak about this stuff. It seems like the fire service is, with my experience with it, it was who who dispatch called when no one else could figure it out. Right? We've got to be doctors, we've got to be veterinarians, we've got to be plumbers, electricians, you know, mechanics, all of the things, right? And at some point, yeah, it's hard to be really good at a whole lot of things, or at least to the detail that needs to happen sometimes in roping rescue or even the particular disciplines. I do know that some fire departments that are progressive have acknowledged this, and so they're creating more specialized teams that are taking on smaller amounts of things, like maybe they do confined space and rope rescue and swift water, and that's sort of their three disciplines that they play round robin on training with. And then another heavy rescue may take hazmat, structural collapse, and so on and so forth. So I am seeing teams start to specialize. That hasn't always been the case, but I do see that sort of happening. But, the one good thing about the fire service that was drilled into me is that in the moment of a high stress environment, in the middle of an emergency, you always fall back to your highest level of training. It's sort of the unconscious competence that you fall back on. So if you've trained on this, then in the moment of the battle, when you're not really clearly thinking about things, you fall back on that highest level of training. That's the reason why I say that you should be practicing pickoffs often, because that way, when it happens, you have that unconscious competent movement where that's the last thing you train on. That's the last thing. That's what you're going to go do. I think that it would just have to be a priority, and if it's not a priority, then it becomes that little bit of liability. I think the fire service already deals with some of that particular type of thing, not just in the roping world, but in a lot of the other disciplines that they do. So I think, once again, if it's a hard question to put an exact answer on and to have the perfect solution for. I think at the end of the day, it's really up to the person that holds the knowledge to keep the integrity, to maintain their knowledge of it, to make sure that they practice it. It's sort of that pride and ownership and the skill set that they possess, and trying to maintain that.
Well said.
Jason, is there anything you would like to add to that from your perspective?
So I can only speak for what we do in the city that I work for. So we have a technical rescue team, which our disciplines are going to be rope rescue, confined space, which almost every confined space has some kind of rope discipline in it, structural collapse, trench rescue. So for us, that's what we focus on when we train. We have two heavy rescues, and vehicle extrication. So we have two heavy rescues in the city, and on top of our fireman training, we also do all the technical rescue stuff. And for my city, we track all that stuff on a computer program called Target Solutions, and we try every year to meet. Realistically, we try to exceed the number of hours that are in that system for us to meet for that training. But if you don't mind, I have a question for you, just for your industry. So, in the fire service, we have, when we operate, we have like a 2 in, 2 out type of deal for fires, right? So for your industry, when you're sending somebody over the edge to do whatever work, do you also have somebody that's standing by on top for that rescue, or can you send everybody down? Like, is there a ratio like we kind of have, or how's that work?
Yeah, that's a really good question. As SPRAT defines it in their safe practices document, a work team must consist of at a minimum 2 people. So you do need a work partner to be able to go do rope access work. Now, in the context of that, both of you may be on rope at the same time, or it may be that one's on rope while one is at the anchor set, standing by. It really depends on the job. It depends on the rigging scenario. There's sort of a lot that goes into that setup. But at a minimum, you should have another technician there with you doing work. Sometimes the rescue scenario is that if we're working literally side by side, in that scenario, it may be quicker for me to do a contact pick-off rescue and bring you straight down the fall line. So that might be the fastest way, and that might be the approach to take. Really depends on the scenario there. But it also goes on to say that you must also have enough technicians on site to provide prompt rescue. So what they're saying by that is that if it is such a complicated rigging scenario that it requires more than one person to facilitate that rescue, then maybe you have more technicians on site just to be able to put one person on rope. So it really depends on what the rigging scenario is. At a minimum, you have a work partner.
So is it so like OSHA for confined space, right? We have a entrant, an attendant, and then a rescuer. So you always have 3 people. So that person in the confined space goes down, you have someone to rescue them, but then of course you have the attendant at the hole making sure that everything's squared away. So you don't necessarily operate in that way. I don't know what the OSHA rules are.
Yeah, there's not a defined role per se. In other words, if you have one technician on rope in the fall line or the hazard zone, that you have to have one person in any particular other place for a particular task. In other words, there's no seat assignments for the rope access technician at the job site. It really depends on the job site itself and what the site supervisor deems as necessary to provide prompt rescue for these folks, or how the operation goes down as far as that goes. I know that I have in a lot of scenarios where I've got a level 1 technician on rope and they're doing a relatively simple task, but where they're doing this task is there could be some potential outside interference or some complications that could arise. Maybe even at the roof where our anchors are being established. So in that scenario, it may be that I literally put one person, like mother hen, just sitting there on that anchor set, being ready for the possibility of needing to remote rescue that technician that is on the rope, and to kind of playing defense for the environment that's around us. So maybe we're there with other workers, we're there with other people that, like at a construction site, for instance, where we may just need someone up there at that anchor set to keep eyes on it, to make sure that no one's, dragging boards across our ropes or anything of that sort. But directly, no, there's no hard, fast seat assignment for any particular role that I'm aware of.
And to answer your question about OSHA, Jason, they simply say that there has to be provision made for prompt rescue, and prompt is defined as fast enough to prevent further harm. So if it's an electrical environment, it's going to be very different than if there's nothing else going on in the environment.
If I may, I have something to add. So for our company, we get to establish whether it's permit or non-permit required confined space. And we do that with air monitoring and what the rescue is. But we follow the same policy that you have, Jason. We have an entrant, we have a standby, or we have an entrant, we have a supervisor, and then we have an attendant. So we have the standby, rescue, supervisor, the entrant, and an attendant. So it just depends on, I guess not OSHA per se, but it's job to job, company to company, but we follow the same rules that you have.
And I'll actually expand on that just a little bit more. Something that I haven't spoken about or spoken to yet is the Access Work Plan. The Access Work Plan is sort of an umbrella document that describes who's doing the work, where we're doing the work, what's happening here. You know, it's the sheet of music that we're all singing from. Within that Access Work Plan, there is a rescue plan. So it's a document on its own that is underneath the Access Work Plan. That document describes how we're going to affect the rescue. How, you know, and it can be as detailed as we need it to be, as in these are the devices we're using, this is how you operate the devices, this is how we're going to go through the whole rescue scenario. Also, another document that may or may not be accompanied with that Access Work Plan, depending on whether we need it or not, is special permitting. So if we're doing rope work in a confined space area and it requires a confined space permit, then indeed we will have an entrant. We'll have someone that I think it's defined on those as whole watch. So we will assign those roles if it is that we need that confined space permit to operate in that confined space. So these documents all fall underneath that Access Work Plan. If you as a responder are showing up to an industrial rope access site for an emergency, the first thing I would do would be to ask for that Access Work Plan. It should be on site and available, and it should be there for you to utilize. In that Access Work site, or the work plan, it should have the names of the people who are on site, the technicians and their levels. It may even have assignments as to what their task is, but it'll have contact information, emergency contact information in it. It's going to have other pertinent information that pertains directly to the job. It's going to have the MSDS sheets for any chemicals that may be being used on the job site. Then it may also have that rescue plan so that you can see the rescue plan, maybe even utilize that rescue plan for yourself to affect the rescue that may already be going on. And then also those special permits, such as permits for hot work, confined space, those types of things. So if you go to the job site and you find the site supervisor, as a responding agency, I would ask for their work plan. It's going to give you all of that information, or should give you all of that information. I hope that was a little bit more.
Do you pre-plan with emergency services locally if you're doing a weird job like on a bridge or a strange structure?
Yes, so I certainly encourage that. Sometimes the clients don't want you doing that process. I've ran into that a few times where it's like, whoa, let's not, we don't want to draw attention here. And I try to sell it to them as, well, I'm not drawing attention. What I'm doing is I'm trying to make everyone aware. I'm trying to cover the bases. So I do try to incorporate that, where in my Access Work Plan, I will certainly have a printed directions to the nearest hospital. I'll have, written directions to the nearest hospital with and all that. I will also do that same thing, is I'll have direct phone numbers to the nearest medic, to the nearest fire station, those types of things. And I'll typically call them and let them know that I'll be doing, rope access work in their district. I try to communicate that the best I can. Like I said, sometimes the clients, they don't really encourage you to do that. But if I have the choice, I certainly do. Working at industrial plants, that's different. A lot of times an industrial plant will have their own emergency response, and they do not want you to initiate the 911 process directly. They will do that. And so it really depends on the site as to what the initiation of the 911 process looks like from a site supervisor perspective.
Nice. We are coming up on the 1 hour mark. We try to keep this no longer than an hour and 15 minutes. So do we have any other questions or anything else we'd like to touch on before we close?
I start keeping a list, but one, in addition to asking for the access work plan, what are some of the just best general first questions to ask a client when you get on site? I know we talked about it the other day. And then additionally, maybe one story about where you caught some bad rigging and it potentially saved a life. So I feel like we just need to glance over that one more time to add the gravity of the situation.
Yeah. So the first question is, that could probably take a whole other hour or better. But ultimately, some of the obvious, like I on every job site, I try to ask myself 6 questions that I feel like will sort of quickly grab a lot of this information up front in that information vacuum. And once again, I have learned this from someone else, so this is not my original thought on these 6 questions. But the first one is, who do I work for? Directly, who am I responsible for communicating with? So who do I work for? Who works for me? Where do I get my equipment to do this job? How much time do I have to do it in? Exactly what is my job? What is the end result? What are we trying to accomplish here? And number 6 is, how are we going to communicate? How do we communicate with each other? I try to answer those 6 questions. That to me typically clarifies a lot of the things that frustrate folks on job sites. I know I found myself to be frustrated on a job site, and it's probably because I don't know the answer to one of those 6 questions. I'm frustrated because I can't get in touch with so-and-so, or they can't hear me and I've been yelling at them. Well, that's number 6. I didn't figure out how to communicate first. And it's those 6 questions that I typically ask to get the ball rolling. Some other questions that I ask that may not be so obvious is I always ask, where do we use the bathroom? Where's the restroom at? How do we make provisions for that? I know that sounds silly, but there's a lot of times where we go to job sites and we haven't discussed that. And the next thing you know, we lose 3 hours of the day just to go to the restroom and back. And it's because we didn't really pre-plan that. Some job sites I've gone to just expect you to never use the bathroom at all. You just don't, which is, we're humans, okay? We have to. So we need to figure this out. That's another question, even as simple as it is, just knocking out something like that. Typically, those 6 questions, I believe, will cover most of it, especially from the get-go. Who do I work for? Who works for me? Where do I get my things? How much time do I have to accomplish this goal? What is the goal? What is the end result? And number 6 is, how do we communicate? I think that's the quick down and dirty version. That's also can be implemented in the fire service. I kind of took that from the rescue world and applied it into the industrial rope access world. It's basically a quick incident command system check. That's what that is. So anyway, I hope that helped with that question.
Yeah, and then the second part to the question was just a quick story of something that you've seen that you might have prevented that helped save a life or could have stopped something catastrophic.
So I've been on a lot of job sites where knotcraft, I think, would be, well, there's 2 things. One is edge protection, protecting the ropes. And the other is tying knots correctly. I think those are 2 of the big ones that I see a lot. And I'm anybody who knows me for very long knows that I'm big on knots. Man, when you tie a knot and you hand that over to me, you're handing me your resume. And I'm picky about what I see in the knot tying. And the reason why is because it simply instantly tells me how much you put into your craft. It really does. I don't mean to be judgmental, but it's a quick way for me to reference that. early in my career, I did skip that part. I thought, man, I know 5 good knots. That's all I need to know. And so, and off down the road I go. What I quickly came to learn too, though, is that knowing your knot craft really opens up the possibilities that are out there for rigging, especially. But I dare say that, I always reference the classic Clifford Ashley, in the Ashley Book of Knots, where he says a knot is not nearly right. It's either 100% correct or hopelessly wrong. And I absolutely know that to be true. And so that's what I would say about the knot part, the knot craft part. Practice it. Make sure you're good at it. As far as edge protection, I noticed that a lot of people neglect padding or protecting their ropes, especially at edges. Sometimes it's just a piece of carpet flung over the edge, and that's what we do. The most vulnerable part in a roping system is that potential energy looking for a place to go, especially when it's under tension. And we need to protect our ropes 100%. And sometimes I go a little above and beyond on the rope protection just to make sure that that's not where we're going to have a failure. I think it would be pretty silly to say that a $5 rope pad is what could have protected someone's life, right? And so I do diligence in rope padding. So I see that a lot. Those are 2 areas as a level 3 I'm constantly looking at in newer roping technicians and that sort of thing is their knot craft, and are we doing due diligence to protect our ropes in our rope systems? A real quick story on an incident. I was hired out as a level 3. At this time, I was sort of doing freelance work, so I was hired into a company as a level 3 to site supervise a pretty large window cleaning operation that was going on. And they were utilizing rope access methods, not controlled descent methods. So they were trying to do the best that they could with all of this. And they were doing well with it. Because I came onto this job site, I did not know anyone. I did not know their equipment. I had no clue of what they were going to be utilizing until the day I showed up that morning. And we had miles of rope laying there. And I literally went through all of the ropes and inspected them. I looked at their equipment. I looked at all of their gear before we got started. Now, it took a while, but once again, I'm taking on that responsibility of being a site supervisor and managing this. Coming into it, not knowing any of these things, I wanted to do my due diligence and check. Well, we get up on the roof and we start deploying these ropes, and I've checked most of them, so I've tasked people and they're doing their thing. And as I'm inspecting one of the last ropes, it's a 600-foot rope, and I get to about the middle of it, and sure enough, there's a perfect hourglass right in the rope. It's core shot right in the middle. I mean, it's 2 ropes held together by a sheet is what this rope is. And I looked at the technician because they each have their own rope set and their own kit. And I asked the guy, I said, have you noticed this before? And he goes, no, I sure haven't. I said, how long have you been using this rope? He goes, man, I used it yesterday, day before, all week. It's the rope I use. And I was like, well, friend, I hate to do this to you, but I'm about to cut your rope right in the middle. And he goes, no, you're not cutting my rope. You do not cut my rope. And I'm like, I'm not walking away from right here without this being 2 separate ropes. It's already 2 separate ropes, man. We've got to cut it. We've got to put it in 2. And he got really upset. And so I was like, why are you getting so upset about this? You understand that you've lost the strength of this rope right here, right? And he's like, yeah, but he goes, my employer expects me to pay for half of these ropes. And I'm not cutting it because I can't afford any rope. So I was like, I tell you what, I'll take care of that. You give me just a second. And I got that employer on the phone, and we had a conversation. I hung up the phone, and I cut his rope, cut it in 2. And he ended up getting a new rope that day. But that's a scary story. This guy's been descending on a rope that was, it was absolutely, I've got a photo of it, and that was one that I wanted to put in the slideshow, but it was a scary moment to think about that. And also to think that if I had just trusted this equipment, hey guys, go do your thing, man, where would we be, you know? And so that's one scary story that I have, or at least an experience where it is worth checking the equipment, not taking it as face value, making sure you're doing those daily equipment checks in the mornings. And then also, once again, you had a level one who wasn't speaking up about an issue that he acknowledged was there. You know, I think it's easier to go find another job than it is to come back from the dead. So that's kind of where I stood on that. Taken care of. Hope that was a scary enough story for you.
I have a little 30-second story if you think we have time for a second, Louis.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Brandon.
So something we didn't get to today that I was really hoping we could, but it's all right, is working with other trades and just dealing with people working within your zones and areas. I was working at the Atlanta Falcons Stadium doing cables for the air conditioning ducts. Well, we had about a 200-foot jug climb that we were going to do on some ropes that we had set the day before. There's 3 of us that were going up there. I'm a fresh level 1, so I got my level 1. This is my first gig afterwards. And at that point, there were maybe 3 or 4 miles of rope hanging in the stadium. And we worked day shift, and those people working 24 hours a day. Well, the first guy gets on there, he jumps on the ropes. Hey, it's still holding. He climbs up, he gets to the top, and he calls a stop to work. And then he gets off. He's like, I'll talk in a second, gets off, takes a picture. Some iron workers had gone and removed the slings and carabiners and took them off of the ropes and then just hung the figure 8 knot on a bolt head. And that was it. So that was a stop to work for the entire day. And they spent the rest of the day checking all the rigging. And a job in LA, something like that happened. And every morning, 2 people volunteered to come in off work's time and go through and check all the rigging. Took 2 hours every morning of their own personal time. They went and checked all the rigging because the company wouldn't approve it to check it otherwise. But that's my scary story. Do you have any last second things?
Brandon Powers, just do you have any last minute words of wisdom for people who are growing through their rope access career and growing into their rope access career?
I mean, there's all the things, you know, put yourself in front of the thought leaders, find ways to grasp the information, take classes, all of those things, of course. I think in all of it is slow is smooth and smooth is fast. So take your time with it. There's a lot, and there's a lot to learn and a lot to know. I mean, that's sort of the gist of it. I think it's a wonderful career to get into, but seek out that education, seek out platforms like this where you're getting in front of groups with open discussion. You're able to talk about it and grow from the experiences. I think that's the big thing is like I said, get in front of the thought leaders, pursue those classes and that knowledge and that learning.
Thank you, Brandon. Brandon Beavers, do you have any last minute thoughts and words of wisdom to add from your perspective?
Listen, just don't listen to reply, just listen to learn. That's something I'm personally working on. Is I don't need to always have an opinion. There's people that are much more wisdom oriented than I am that I can learn a lot from if I would just shut up sometimes. So that's my thing, is just listen. You don't always have to do what someone says, and you shouldn't always do what someone says, but definitely hear them.
Thank you. Anybody else have anything else that you'd like to add before we close?
So
Cool.
I think that the most valuable thing that a person can give is their time. I certainly appreciate your time, everyone's time for that matter. Thank you for facilitating this platform for us to be able to do this. That's all.
You're very welcome. And we're making it up as we go along and trying to improve and making it better. So please do send your suggestions and recommendations to Brandon Beavers or myself. And we're hoping to meet on the 1st and the 3rd Thursdays of each month, approximately around this time. So we'll keep you posted, and hope to see you again. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.